They called him the Iron General. Tough, prickly, but fair. He was not loved by any of the emperors he lived under, but he was idolized by his soldiers. He wanted to be a commander from childhood, but only achieved his goal by the age of 50. And that's in the 19th century. Field Marshal Yosif Gurko, a man who won the Russian-Turkish War and liberated Bulgaria. There, his name is still known to everyone. In Russia, however, the memory of the commander is almost lost. There is only one monument for the whole country, and the remains of the estate. Why did the noble son of the nobility prefer a cozy manor to the battlefield? How did he reach the highest echelons of power, despite his kinship with the family of disgraced liberals? And how did his prickly character help to get rid of the deadly Turkish yoke? We unraveled the tangle of Field Marshal Gurko's case. This is the year Alexander Pushkin meets his future wife, Natalia Goncharova. The Democratic Party appears in the United States, and Anapa finally becomes a Russian city forever. At the same moment, Nicholas I declares war on the Ottoman Empire. Another one. He wants to overthrow their monarchy once and for all. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. In 1828, Yosif Gurko is born in Veliki Novgorod, the future terror of the Turks. He is from a very wealthy family, from a very promising several estates. You could say he was born with a golden spoon in his mouth. He's destined for a fairy tale. He was born into a military family, so to speak, because his father, Vladimir Iosifovich, he was already a glorified commander, a hero of 4 wars. Vladimir Gurko was a participant in the Patriotic War of the 12. He also participated in the suppression of the Polish uprising in the 30s, and by that time, of course, both Roth and the commander himself was quite a famous man. He led all the reserve troops of Russia. Field Marshal's mother, Baroness Korff, also a very famous family. He could sit like that, do nothing, and manage his estates. But Gurko had no such thoughts. Who will otherwise defend the Russian Empire? This is not to Oblomov's mind at all. In 1828, Vladimir Iosifovich bought this village of Sakharov, which later became their family estate. This is the territory, just a few hours' drive from Moscow, and you are in the family estate. Joseph used to run along these alleys as a teenager. Here they came for summer vacations. Of course, for a 24-year-old graduate of the Corps of Pages, estate management is something not interesting at all. He has a completely different area of interest, military. Therefore, everything is left in the care of the manager. But in Gurko's life, this estate will appear more than once. He was a Spartan in the truest sense of the word. The children here at Sakharov grew up as Spartans. There are 6 of them here. Boys were born. I mean, the way of life. Horses, dugouts. He was trained to be an officer in the Russian army. So all these factors certainly influenced Gurko's development as a military leader. But tragedy strikes. When he's 13, his mother dies, then his sister. His father is not released from the service, and Joseph is sent to the Corps of Pages. The Corps of Pages is ballroom dancing, foreign languages, elite training, a general background of culture. In addition to the church, Gurko always wanted to take part in the fighting, and such an opportunity was given to him. In 1953, the Crimean War began, a very interesting and tragic episode for Russian history. But when he arrived there, it was over, this war. But unfortunately, we were defeated by the Turks. Why? Because Krupov's cannons of the Great Ottoman Fleet fired 2 kilometers farther than ours. This war was hard for Russia, because not only the Ottoman Empire fought against Russia. Great Britain, France took part. At that time, these were the strongest powers. As a result, Russia signed a humiliating peace treaty. But there is good without good. The fact is that Alexander II, thanks to this defeat, realized and saw all the shortcomings in the Russian Empire. And the era of rapid reform began. The most significant reform, the abolition of serfdom. The Crimean War shows the old way of life inhibits the empire to develop industry to catch up with neighboring Europe. It is possible only by reforming society and restructuring on capitalist rails. The peasants are also resentful. While the Russian-Turkish front was unfolding, they are organizing mass revolts in the regions to get rid of serfdom entrusted, among others. And young Gurko, the emperor, trusts him. The reform itself was very difficult. It, of course, presupposed activists who were, on the one hand, people who were, on the one hand, sufficiently organized as the military, and on the other hand, sufficiently formed as a diplomat. It was a junction of both the landlords, that is, as people of elite estates, and the peasants, as people of, in general, a different life. When serfdom was abolished, Yosif Gurko was in Samara province, and he directly carried out the will of the sovereign. He didn't take the beggar's side, neither the side of the peasants, who did not interpret this reform in the same way, nor the side of the landlords, who wanted to grab as much fertile land as possible. Gurko followed the principle of justice, and for this he was highly appreciated in St. Petersburg. Everywhere the manifesto on the termination of serfdom was heard by peasants with deep reverence, and nowhere did this glad tidings give them cause for the slightest drunkenness. Everywhere the peasants met me with sincere joy. Nowhere did I encounter the slightest disobedience. A man so charismatically austere, he could, so to speak, in a somewhat disciplined way bring this out. Everyone wanted it, but no one really knew how it could be and how it happened. That's when he was actually entrusted with this question. Maybe the Russo-Turkish War simply made it even easier to carry out this reform. When a nobleman, for example, is in the same trench with a soldier from the same village. This war, it somewhere even united many and many. Gurko was too straightforward. He did not possess, in a way, some kind of, maybe, talent of a politician, where it is necessary to hypocritize, flirt, change his views. In this regard, it will be difficult for him in the future to communicate with representatives of the higher elites. Quite soon, Joseph shows his stubbornness. He chooses a wife not by calculation, but by heart. His chosen wife is Maria Andreevna Salias de Tourmine, daughter of the famous writer Eugenia Tour, a liberal and emancipated woman. The sovereign, of course, is against such a union. But what does Joseph in love care about other people's opinions? He is truly in love, and he sees no problem in the fact that the family is unreliable. Well, liberals. So what? He loves his country. We see the intransigence of Gurko, who, following his sense of love, married a wife who was undesirable to the Tsar state, and who, let's say, did not bless the marriage. If we talk about Maria Andreevna, who was 10 years younger than the field marshal, younger by 10 years. Here is her mother Elizaveta Vasilyevna Sukhoy-Kobilina, by her husband Selyazda Turnomir, her brother Evgeny Andreyevich Selyazda Turnomir, a famous writer. He was called Russian Duma. He's actually a member of the Sukhoy-Kobilin family. Together with his mother Elizaveta Vasilyevna is a royal family. From Andrei Kobila in general went the whole family of Romanovs, Ruriks and so on. And she herself was a great writer, left behind historical novels. She wrote in a magnificent language. Even Turgenev called her, well, at his level, as it were. All this family was considered very liberal for Gurko and unworthy of such a high-ranking official. The emperor did not want to forgive Gurko his marriage for a long time. The young men settled in the Tsar's village. It was as if he became disgraced and, much to the surprise of his co-workers, who had no idea what had happened between him and the emperor, but he did not receive any appointments. Work, no matter what. Still, after a few years, this unshakable principle of field marshal begins to show its effectiveness, and he falls back into favor. At court it becomes clear the wife is not bad, and the marriage is happy. 6 children in a lifetime. It is not a joke, is it? And it turns out that liberals can be reformed. I deeply love your father, not because he is a hero, but because I had the opportunity to understand all his rare qualities: straightforward, truthful, noble, humble, pure-hearted man. They lived, not rich, but also not poor, in love rare one to another, to you and to everything around. The stage of takeoff of Yosif Gurko's career will come during the Russian-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878. Here was manifested the talent of a field marshal, who prepared himself for it all his conscious life. Approximately so many territories are under the Ottoman yoke at the beginning of the war. They have been occupied by the Turks for centuries. 1876. Bulgarians realize that they can't take it anymore. The April uprising erupts. The Bashibazuks suppress it with extreme cruelty. But all is not in vain. The uprising attracts the attention of Alexander II. Russia, as a Slavic power, considers it its duty to support brotherly nations. We have already recovered from the Crimean War, so we lend a helping hand. Historically, Russia has a mission to protect its fellow Slavic brothers. Bulgaria was under the Turkish yoke for 500 years. The cruelest people, Janissaries, Circassians, Bashebuzuks, the Turkish Gambit, well, of course, it's a romanticized form of Turkish warfare. But it shows when the heads are there on horses and all that sort of stuff. There was no humanity there at all. But it's not just some phrase, yoke. It's a period of humiliation. It's a period of deaths. It's a period of abuse. The Balkan Orthodox peoples are trying to throw off this hateful yoke. They do not succeed. They lack resources. They lack strength. And the Russian Empire comes to their aid. Everyone was imbued with the experience of the genocide of the Bulgarian people. Genocide. During the Second Bulgarian Uprising, just before 1877, about 30,000 Bulgarians were slaughtered. That's a lot for Bulgaria. That is, they could take away a woman, they could take away a mother, a girl of some kind. They took away Turkish boys, made them just thugs who hated nothing at all. We read Turgenev, we remember the image of Insav, on which even generations of Russian revolutionaries were brought up. It all appealed to us, the struggle for freedom, and we in general are always enthusiastic about such things. Russian patriots, Slavic figures most of all, and churchmen. They were inspired by the fact that it is possible to liberate brotherly nations, and they helped Greeks, they helped Serbs, they helped Montenegrins, Macedonians, they helped everybody. The Russian Empire does not immediately come to war. First, she is a peacemaker, organizes a conference of European diplomats in Constantinople. They agree not to intervene in the emerging military conflict with Turkey, but the problem is that they say one thing and do another. The Ottoman Empire is in fact financed by the West. They have German steel, English and French navy, General Pasha, Germans, English and other Europeans. Why do European civilized powers support outright thugs? First, the West fears the strengthening of Russia. Our support of the Slavic peoples clearly leads to further expansion of the empire, and thus to a violation of the balance of power. Better a thug than giving territories to the Slavs. Second, the Ottoman Empire controls important trade routes and strategic areas. Supporting the Turks allows the West to control these regions. Well, of course, civilized Europe is economically tied to Constantinople. Trade and investment are put on the stream, so we have no allies in a future war. The plan for a peacekeeping operation appears at the end of 1876. The Emperor and Minister of War Milutin approve it. The basic idea is a lightning victory. They want to reach the Danube, split into several detachments, each with its own tasks. Alexander II is confident. They will reach the capitals in 3 days and help as quickly as possible to the Bulgarian brothers. The Russian army faced 2 obstacles. The first was to overcome the Danube, to force the Danube, where the Turks had strong fortifications. And the second problem was the Balkan range, overcoming the Balkan mountains. The war is near, and the cucumber is still holed up in the rear. The age is almost 50, although the soul is torn on the battlefield for justice. Earlier, at the summer training camp, he quarrels to hell with Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, commander-in-chief of the Danube army. Did not agree on how to use the cavalry. It comes to the point that Gurko says he will not listen to Nicholas and will do as he sees. At first said, and then thought, that's it. He went on the road to such a man. That's it. Career over. What was Joseph's surprise when it turned out that it was the Grand Duke who promoted his candidacy for a leading post in the army. I remembered his integrity. In fact, Gurko led our landing party from the beginning. Because the emperor's brother went to the Black Sea there, to Varna, to Seabrus. He went there, to the Black Sea. General Kridina led the whole army along the northern Bulgaria to Pleven, just along the northern Bulgaria. And up to Pleven we marched victoriously. And there we stumbled over it. When Gurko was assigned to the active army on the Danube, he rejoiced like a boy. But not for long, because the responsibility is huge. He is called out of turn. I felt terribly sorry for Comrade Bulanov. He was crying with frustration that he remained in the reserve. I promised to get him into the army, and I fulfilled my promise. Then I had a feeling of pity for my poor wife. One thing was consoling. She is in the village, and my brief preparations for the march will not tear at her soul. Gurko with, naturally, the support of the Emperor Alexander II. Headed Field Marshal to be. He was then a general, also headed the headquarters of the main army, where he was younger in rank than many. Who was younger in rank than most? He was immediately put in charge of the advance party. It was small, 8,000 men about with guns. Gurko learns a long way only in Bucharest. The order of his appointment as chief is already there, and the detachment itself on the right bank of the Danube. There is also a meeting with the emperor. I'll never forget that meeting. The emperor is standing near the cliff, Danube, and on the other side of the Sestov with his cathedral. He seemed quite happy. The emperor, with love in his voice, explained to me what was visible before us, adding, "This is all ours now." In character, Joseph Vladimirovich was a rare exception. If he was convinced of anything, he never hesitated for a moment to assume full responsibility for action. If he considered something just and necessary, he would express his opinion without paying attention to whether it would be liked in the higher spheres or not. He therefore had many problems with his colleagues because he was so focused on the army. He made sure that it was trained. He made sure that the soldiers were fed, trained, ready, and, so to speak, didn't need anything. Directly participated in the liberation of the town of Velikoterny. And Velikoterny is, well, you can afford, so to speak, a sacred city for Bulgarians. It's the former capital of the Bulgarian kingdom. Yes, and the liberation had a huge symbolic meaning. In Velikoternogo, it is in, well, it's in a somewhat, in such a position that there was no need to advance on Tarnoy, by and large, because further on there are impregnable mountains, that's all. But if you cross them, that's interesting. He acted very quickly, accurately, just incredibly fast, although the Turks had weapons. Their whole army was exactly twice as many soldiers, warriors, than the Russian army had. The Turks did not expect an attack. The Turks abandoned all their guns and left the city. Yosif Gurko entered Velikotarnovo in triumph, where the Bulgarian people met him joyfully and welcomed him, and they finally realized that the long-awaited freedom was coming to Bulgarian soil. At 5 o'clock this afternoon, I took Terno from the battle. Casualties cannot yet be determined, but at any rate they are insignificant. the Turks have retreated in the direction of Osman Bazar. According to the testimony of the inhabitants, there were up to 3,000 Nizama with 6 guns internal. Took the Turkish camp, tents, many ammunition boxes and pharmacy wagon. The delight of the inhabitants is not described. Riding on horseback before the lined-up Bulgarian militia, Gurko said, "I hope that you will yet revive the thorny." He did not drink any alcoholic beverages and did not smoke tobacco. But he was very fond of tea, which he drank with great pleasure. When it was not possible to have lunch during the day, he ate chocolate tea. Victories of the southern detachment cause a real panic in Constantinople. Turks apparently have not heard the phrase "horses do not change at the crossing," so they decided to shuffle their dignitaries. Instead of elderly Abdi Pasha, they appointed Suleiman Pasha, as if it was a matter of age. He literally, in 17 days, throws a 25,000-strong corps of Ottomans to the sea. Tirnogo is just the beginning. The main task is to capture the Balkan passes. There are 4 passes through the mountains, 3 of them as uncomfortable as possible. The remaining Shipka is fortified by the Turks. Gurko's decision is to go through it. This is the crossing of the Balkans in the winter of 1970. In fact, all the military commanders said that it is impossible to cross the Balkans in winter. In Bulgaria in the winter, the Siberians were freezing from the inside. About 700 of our soldiers died, and 9,500 froze. On Shipka, everything is calm, but Shipka was the junction through which the armies could pass. That's why Suleiman Pasha stayed in southern Bulgaria. Osman Pasha, who was surrounded by Field Marshal, just already commanding 80,000 troops. That is, the 2 armies were the main cut-off, and Vezel Pasha was spread across Bulgaria, including on this Shipka, where he was actually chased away. You see these mountains. You eagles will fly over them. You will show that for a Russian soldier there can be no obstacles. Ooh. In all the villages which our troops passed, the Bulgarians gave the most cordial welcome. Everywhere a bell was struck, and the inhabitants ran out to meet the troops, carrying large vessels of cold wine and water. Gurko was prepared for any form of Suvarovian fighting. That's the whole point, because if you say that Bulgaria is the south, a resort there and so on, absolutely not. Side by side with Gurko is fighting the great artist Vereshchagin. He has already painted his apotheosis of the war. Now he is depicting the Balkan events. Here is how he recalls what was happening. "My buddy let Gurko know that the guns to drag to the heights, as ordered, there is no way." To which he received a laconic answer, to drag them in with his teeth. And the guns were pulled out, but not with teeth, but with shafts. What was the main idea? To take the Shipka, this one, from the south and from the north. That's why it was surrounded. Gurko's troops were on one side and our army on the other, and the Turks didn't know where they were coming from. The Daily News correspondent in his report, Behind the Balkans, documented how the successful crossing was celebrated. It was one he allowed himself and others to savor. General Gurko summoned his orderly, who handed him a small tin box. Instead of crosses, he took out 3 pieces of chocolate, and calling General Rauch and Naglaski to him, offered them each a piece. The Prussian military commissioner, Baron Leibniz, also received his share. Osman's army was surrounded. It tried to break through. He was wounded, and in fact, after the surrender of Osman's 40,000-strong army, he was allowed to take Sofia, and there he went to Sofia, through the Balkans. That is, practically he was invited as such a paratrooper diversionist, going there to the deep rear of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, to Constantinople. He almost made it all the way to Istanbul, and Alexander II's dreams could have become a reality. But again, the failure of the subplay. Gurko is brought back, and he goes back with his army across the Balkan Ridge to help. Our army was demoralized somewhere in the middle of the Russo-Turkish War. And basically a lot of people were saying we should get out of Bulgaria. Then it would definitely be carved up if we withdrew from it. But Gurko makes a report that we should by no means leave Bulgaria, because after Bulgaria everything will fall. Three times we tried to take Pleven, and all three failed. This is probably the first and the last case in history, when the Russian emperor for 8 months was not on the territory of his own country, but on the territory of another country, and managed the troops there. The fortress was of strategic importance and was well fortified. Initially, the Russian army suffered huge losses. The command could not effectively organize its forces to achieve success in the assault. For example, only in the first assault, we lost about 7,000 fighters. Our troops blocked Pleven from 3 sides, from the north, from the south and from the east, but on the southwestern road went to supply the troops of Suleiman Pasha. Gurko also promptly cut off all this supply. When finally assembled for the final assault, Gurko addressed the troops and said to the officers, "You
Гурко выступил перед войсками и сказал офицерам: "Вы
must rejoice that we, the guards, are allowed to go into battle with Russian arms. You must understand that this is a great honor, and we must affirm this honor. And I am proud to lead this guard into battle." He defended the encirclement of Pleven, the encirclement. And on the Sofia highway, he was entrusted by both the emperor and everybody, agreed to break the armies that were giving the opportunity to supply this Pleven. Under Telish and Gorny and Dolny Dubnik, there are strong battles there. The Turks understood perfectly well what would happen if they were surrounded. There's nowhere to go. We can't be afraid of the Turks on the offensive. And the question of Pleven is a question of Russia's honor. It's not enough to get Osman out of Pleven. We must take him there. All Russia prayed. Normal Russia, which is church, which is believing, Orthodox, all prayed for this victory. This is also the victory of Christianity. This liberation of Christian saints would have been by and large if Alexander II Gurko had not stopped San Stefan with Skobelev. They really wanted to take Constantinople. They would have taken it. Of course, everybody said, "We're going to liberate Constantinople." That was the goal. It's clear that the goal was liberation. Therefore, when Alexander II did not allow Field Marshal, especially Constantinople, Field Marshal Gurko called him a rag. "You are like a rag, Your Imperial Majesty," and went a wall from the war in Sakharovo here. The result of Russia's military victory was a diplomatic victory. The Treaty of San Stefano. Bulgaria was finally gaining its long-awaited independence. Bulgaria's territories were expanding considerably. Serbia, Romania were becoming independent states, but this fact was very much disliked in the West, especially Britain and Austria-Hungary, who believed that it was necessary to temper the appetites of the Russian Empire. And they believed that Bulgaria would become an ally of Russia in the Balkans. In this regard, in the summer of 1978, the Congress of Berlin would be convened, where, alas, Russia would suffer a diplomatic defeat. Austria-Hungary, which did not participate in the defeat of the Turkish armies, will receive the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And Great Britain, which assisted Turkey in the negotiations, will get the whole island of Cyprus without firing a single shot. Gurko is at home on the Sakharov estate. He has a family and promising children, so there's plenty to do at home. This building was supposed to be the Gurko family museum, but in the end, it became a church. First home, now it is a functioning temple. By the way, the building was erected according to the sketches of the famous architect Leontius Benoit, so we can say that this is an ideal example of St. Petersburg architecture of those years. But it does not last long. Field Marshal returns to service. On April 5, 1879, after another assassination attempt on Alexander II, he was appointed temporary military governor-general of St. Petersburg. He's appointed military governor-general of St. Petersburg, tasked with fighting the internal enemy and combating terrorism. Alexander II would eventually be assassinated by terrorists, thus ending the Great Reforms. He warned Alexander II that there could be an explosion in the Winter Palace, but Alexander didn't let him prepare for it accordingly. And there was an explosion. 50 people died. Freedom for all that is good it was, is and will be. But freedom for sinful thought, it's often fought. Well, what is it to kill the head of state, for example? Well, they have free thoughts that I will go and blow him up today. I wonder if I'll blow up someone else later. Rob a bank or something. That's freedom. That's the kind of freedom they wanted. After this explosion, Gurko was appointed Governor-General of Odessa. There he reveals the revolutionary underground, takes part in the capture of the legendary revolutionary Stepan Kulturin, the one in whose honor is still named many streets in Russia, and at the command of Emperor Alexander III Gurko, executes him. Alexander III is wary of Gurko. No one likes a man who is too straight. His conscience is straight, soldiers. He has some experience in political affairs. He's not stubborn. He's not, as far as I know, to the action of political talkers, and has a straight view of Russia's national needs. There is no cunning in him. He is incapable of intrigue. He would later hold one of the posts in Warsaw. The Kingdom of Poland was part of the Russian Empire. It was a border territory in relation to Germany. And Germany, in the late 19th century, was gaining momentum. Germany had declared itself an empire, and Gurko even then realized that in the future inevitable clash between the Russian Empire and Germany. And so he paid every attention to strengthening the defenses in the West. He was a very significant figure not only in the army, but in the Russian Empire in general. He could have prevented a revolution in Russia when he headed the headquarters of the Western Front. Of course, he went down in the history of our times as a tough man. And if you do not realize it, then also cruel. Gurko is retired. For health reasons he can no longer fight. And finally comes the time of the estate. First, they are engaged in the park, plant hundreds of trees, break flower beds, erect many new buildings, and the bar house and outbuildings. This, by the way, has survived to this day. It is a typical example of Russian patterned building, and looks even now the same as it was conceived hundreds of years ago. In Russia, the memory of Yosif Gurko is not particularly honored. He is forgotten for many people, and the more surprising is that in Bulgaria, the feats of Field Marshal are still remembered. Gurko lived at the crossroads of political transformations, which in a sense destroyed historical memory. Father Gennady has been keeping the memory of Yosif Gurko for 30 years. In the 90s, he saved the surviving building of the estate from demolition and made there a museum shrine. There, he also found the remains of Field Marshal and his wife. I ended up in the church as a doctor. It was quite early, 1986 to 1987, and once in the church, I fell in love with it. It opened to me Russian life, Russian classics. I came here just to live with my wife, well, from Tver, from Kalinin then, and on our first date she took me to the place where we later found the Field Marshal's remains. Yes, and a week later, I proposed to her. I felt that she was my person. I really wanted to build a church here. I was looking for a place, everything. It turned out that I got interested in this building, went to the archives, and with such eyes, so to speak, I found out that it turned out to be an Orthodox church. He settled. That's when we had Victor here, bless him, to become a foreman in this building, the headman of the church. We boarded it up, put in a fireplace. A year later, the Vladika called me, he said, You'll be a priest. Joseph Gurko and his wife were buried according to all the rules. But 1917 comes. The revolution. Local peasants dig up the remains of the couple and just throw them in the parks. They find them almost 100 years later, miraculously. When we were looking for the remains of the field marshal, these are military patriotic clubs, when they found the remains of a woman, but she was wearing shoes, a corset, a silk one. It's half decayed, of course, but there's still enough left to eat. There was a comb. We thought that field marshal was gone, because everything had been tainted for many years, 100 years, and that was it. But suddenly, under Maria Andreevna's remains, there was half a man's remains. Half. That is one arm, one leg, coccyx, lower jaw, and so on. That's how we collected half of the field marshal. Half we didn't. We collected half. The only bust of Yosif Gurko in Russia was installed here. On the territory next to it, they want to build a temple in honor of 15,000 people who died during the battle under the Grenadiers, and save at least these objects from destruction, the only ones preserved from those times. In Bulgaria itself still remember and honor the feat of Field Marshal. 159 streets are named after him, including one of the central streets in Sofia. There's even a town called Gurka. He is still a national hero in the Balkans, despite the complicated relations between once brotherly Bulgaria and Russia. Bulgaria would still be dependent on the Ottoman Empire. They would also have attempts at rebellion. But the Ottoman Empire would successfully suppress all these uprisings. And in the end, Bulgaria would have probably experienced the same thing that Armenia experienced in 1915, genocide. Until now, that the Russian army, Russia, helped to free Bulgaria from Turkish slavery. So, you ask me a question. How does Bulgaria today feel about this fact? Very differently. About 10 years ago, we started to gather history teachers at the Ministry of Education and lecture them that we did not have Turkish slavery. We had a friendly presence. We were good friends, so to speak, cohabiting with Turks and so on. But the Janissaries, these Janissaries there, they were taking children. Every 10th child was taken from Bulgarians. We did this of our own free will in order to have peace. And now in textbooks, they write all our troubles are from Russia. Russia is our first enemy, and so on and so forth. Acts insidiously and sneakily under the cover of such terms as renewal, modernization, and also promotion of openness or tolerance. For example, changing the history curricula, which the historical revisionists are trying to fix in Bulgaria as the official historiography, is to hold Russia and the Soviet Union as occupiers. These people are waging an open war against everything that is a Russian element in the Bulgarian public space. We have had and continue to have to deal with gigantic hate campaigns against Russia. Bulgarians in their overwhelming majority have a very fraternal attitude towards Russia, and they consider the previous system to be the best that Bulgaria had in its recent history. Yosif Gurko saved the Balkans and stood up to defend Russia's borders. His name is not on the rumor, but such heroes write history. Fair, strict, brave, disciplined, straightforward, and hard-working. Yosif Gurko was able to influence the course of history precisely because of these qualities, starting from the most ordinary civilian positions. He was not given seats by acquaintance. He reached the highest echelons of power himself.